Hallo und herzlich willkommen bei 5 Ideen zu einer neuen Interviewfolge. Heute haben wir ein ganz besonderes Interview, auf das ihr euch freuen dürft. Mein Name ist Dave Brüch, und wir sprechen heute über die kommunistische Langzeitstrategie. Wem das Thema noch nichts sagt, der sollte auf jeden Fall dranbleiben. Ich bin zum ersten Mal darauf aufmerksam geworden, als ich ein Buch las von Thorsten Mann vor einigen Jahren. Das Buch Weltoktober. Und heute habe ich internationale Gäste bei mir. Zum einen den Schweizer Krypto-Investor, den ich auch schon öfter zu Gast hatte, Fabio Bossi, und der Amerikaner Jeff Nyquist. Herzlich willkommen zur Show. In diesem Fall werden wir auf Englisch jetzt das Interview führen, das erste Mal auf meinem Kanal, aber ich hoffe, ihr könnt uns folgen. Ja, a warm welcome, Fabio and Jeff. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
As I mentioned in my German introduction already, we are talking about something called the communism long-range strategy, or maybe you'll find some other names for that. This is a very interesting topic, but many people think this is some kind of bizarre to talk about this, to think about that. Although there are books existing for several years about this topic. Also from Jeff, there's a book from Thorsten Mann, Fabio was showing up. So, woo, and I have no book here. Please introduce yourself. We start with Jeff, and tell the people about you and why you are on the show and on the topic.
Well, my name is Jeff Nyquist. I write under the name J.R. Nyquist, and I do a blog, jrnyquist.blog. I have written for WorldNet Daily, Financial Sense, Sierra Times, Epic Times, and I've written a number of books on this subject. I got into the subject 34 years ago when I was in graduate school at UC Irvine, getting a PhD, trying to get a PhD. I didn't ultimately get it. And I ran into communism, and I got interested in it. I studied it, and I did a survey of the defector literature. And I made a discovery that nobody really had bothered to make because people in America weren't reading the defector literature. The defector literature are the books and testimonies of defectors. And I got interested in then meeting and talking to some of these folks. And I made this discovery about what you call the long-range strategy, sometimes called the long-range plan, that's referred to by some of these defectors, referred to by defectors who defected in the 1960s. And their books, and I'm talking about Jan Šejna, who defected from communist Czechoslovakia in 1968, and Anatoly Golitsyn, particularly, who defected in December 1961. When you read their books, if you were reading their books in the 1980s, which is when they came out, you were reading the future, because most of the things in their books came true later because they were aware of this long-range strategy.
Thank you, Jeff, for that introduction. Fabio, you are also talking about this topic for a long time. I wanted to talk about it at my online event Speakers Day and that's why also we have this appointment today. Please introduce yourself as well, and also how you came to the topic of this long-range strategy plan or whatever.
Yes, thanks for having me. So your audience knows me mostly as the crypto guy who talks about cryptocurrencies, etc. But I'm also interested in politics a lot, and in the subject we discussed here today. I became aware of it, I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago. I had been researching about politics and more esoteric stuff like so-called conspiracy theories like Masonry, etc. for quite a while, and One important figure was the discovery of the existence of Willy Münzenberg. I had never heard about that guy. A very important figure. Maybe Mr. Nyquist can tell us more about him. And yeah, that's how I decided to contact Mr. Nyquist, because there is a lot of German history unknown to Germans, and he knows a lot more about German history than the average German, in my opinion. And he just mentioned in his introduction the future, and there are examples in Galitzin's work which are directly affecting German recent history. Like, if I remember correctly, Mr. Galitzin predicted in the early 80s that the Berlin Wall would fall. That's correct, yeah. And I mean, I was born in West Berlin, so to hear that in 81 or 82 or 83 must have sounded crazy. And well, here we go. Here we are.
Yeah, Galitzin defected in December 61, and he had been part of Soviet KGB counterintelligence. He had worked in Vienna, and he eventually was shifted to the outer KGB, to the first chief directorate, the PGU. But what he was is, in the late 1950s, they reorganized the KGB to bring it into alignment with their new long-range strategy that was going to then go into effect in 1960. And he was a part of certain lectures and conferences and meetings and certain documents that were about this reorganization and some of the strategies that they were talking about then. So he brought those with him to the US, and he, when he defected, and he actually had meetings. He wanted to meet with President Kennedy, but he actually met with Bobby Kennedy, who was the Attorney General of the United States and the right-hand man of President John Kennedy. Well, the Kennedy brothers, as you know, had a lot of trouble with the CIA because the Bay of Pigs happened in April of, I think it was April of 1961, after they got in to power, and it was really the brainchild of Allen Dulles under Eisenhower. Eisenhower had given the green light to it, and it failed. It was an attempt to take Cuba back from Castro. And so a lot of people don't know this, but Robert Kennedy effectively, through a special committee, started to run the CIA. And so Robert Kennedy, through the head of the CIA counterintelligence staff, headed by James Angleton, a very famous American counterspy, basically Galitzin started to explain this strategy to Bobby Kennedy. Now, it's my belief that the Kennedy brothers were killed because they believed Galitzin. They are the only American politicians at the level of president or attorney general that understood Galitzin, that understood what he was warning about back in the early 60s. And I think it became a priority to kill him. And in fact, when Kennedy was shot in 1963, in November 1963, and killed, the Soviets sent another defector over. And his name was Yuri Nosenko. Now, I've spoken to the CIA officer who brought Nosenko in from Switzerland, where Fabio is right now. He had previously recruited Nosenko, but he came to believe that Nosenko was a false defector dispatched by the Soviets. Now, get this, how about coincidences? It turns out that the defector Nosenko in early 1964 claimed that he had possession of Oswald's file from when Oswald had defected to the Soviet Union a few years before. Now, what are the odds? You're going to get the defector who's seen Oswald's file. And of course, that file said, oh, he was just a goofball. We never took him seriously. We let him live in in Minsk, and he worked in a radio factory or something, but there was never a problem. And no, the Soviet Union didn't plan to kill Kennedy. And so Nosenko became this person who was trying to tell us this. Well, it was the officer that brought him in was I'm forgetting his name right now, but he told me, and he wrote 2 books about this, that he was definitely a fake defector. When they interrogated him, he didn't know where the elevator was in the headquarters of the First Chief Directorate. He didn't know basic layouts of buildings, of places that he should have been trained at. He could not describe them. Pete Bagley is the name of the officer, the CIA officer. Pete died a few years ago at advanced old age, but in his 80s, he wrote a bunch of books. Spy Wars is one of them. Spy Master is another one. They're fabulous because he was the living memory about this whole thing. Well, they put Nosenko, the CIA, Angleton, and so on in isolation for quite a while to try to get the truth out of him, to try to break him, to get him to admit it. But what ended up happening was a lot of people higher up in the Johnson administration, they wanted Nosenko to be true. They wanted the whole Kennedy assassination, the whole Russian KGB angle to go away. And so it went away. They ended up saying Golitsyn's the fake defector, Nosenko is the real defector. And Golitsyn's information about a long-range strategy, they called it the monster plot, right? Golitsyn has this thing about a monster plot. So they made Nosenko into the hero and Golitsyn into the villain. And there's all these books in English here in the United States about this. And if you're steeped in the literature, you automatically don't pay attention to Golitsyn. You only believe in Nosenko. Nosenko died a few years ago too. Both Golitsyn and Nosenko did.
Jeff,
so that's the background of the long-range strategy, how we came to know about it first in the United States. And so Golitsyn later wrote books like New Lies for Old.
Yeah, Jeff, I think an important point also is to go more in a little bit the details, to give an introduction to all people who are not really into the topic. What is saying the long-range strategy, the communism long-range strategy? What is it? When you describe it like in one sentence, yeah, what's the biggest point, so you get more, the people get the attention for this very important topic?
Well, you
Can I just
sure
add something? Because about your JFK story, there is an interesting detail that some of our viewers or listeners might know already. There's a JFK secret speech, a so-called, on YouTube, it's often called secret speech, and it's cut in pieces, so it sounds like JFK was warning about some Illuminati or Freemasons or whatever. And if you actually read the whole speech and the whole context, he was explicitly warning about the communist global movement, etc. That's just what I wanted to...
John F. Kennedy was anti-communist. And so he did, and it wasn't a secret speech. It was him describing the communist conspiracy and how very dangerous it was. People don't realize that John Kennedy was a liberal anti-communist, very strong one. In fact, people don't remember when he ran against Richard Nixon in 1960, he ran saying that Nixon and Eisenhower had been soft on communism, that they had not been delivered on civil defense or any of the things that needed to be done to protect America. So Kennedy was much more a cold warrior and an enemy of communism than any American president that we had until we got to Ronald Reagan. So that's important. That's an important context. But to describe the long-range strategy in a sentence, it is the long-range strategy of the communist movement worldwide to basically take over the world and make a world communist government by collapsing capitalism and destroying all the nations opposed to communism. That's in a nutshell. And there's 2 main parts to the strategy, and we could go into that.
Yeah, thank you. Very good short description of that, because many people also think when I'm talking about that, yeah, communism is gone, is dead, but I think it's only in the underground, or maybe it's hidden and has some other costumes. We have the green costumes, especially, which are now conquering everywhere, and of course the climate change program, which is like the rooftop or the what is it? The bridge over all, the roof, and so you can go in every part of the economy, of the laws, and so on and so on. In Germany now we get a climate ministry combined in the economic ministry in Germany. So we see something like the communism idea coming softly and very easy and taking place, and taking action, and taking also overtaking charge. And I think this is a very important point. And always when I'm talking about this in my audience and on my Telegram channel, for example, I know many people are getting aggressive. They think, oh no, we see the problems of the actual situation, actual crisis, but this is not a communism problem. So, but still we are talking about that, and I think there is much connection to the actual now to this crisis or whatever, this something like psychological war going on worldwide, and that's why it's so important to talk about that.
Russian military strategy has a word, it's maskirovka, which is kind of a cross between the word camouflage and deception, but with psychological overtones and masking. It's the word in which you make something look like something else. So you could say that the climate change is maskirovka. It's communism made to look like we're going to save the planet from bad weather, or from pollution, or from carbon, or carbon footprints. You have also the feminist movement, the radical feminism. When you look at Gloria Steinem and various leaders of the radical feminist movement in America, you find that they had secretly been members of the Communist Party USA. They had been involved in Communist Front organizations. Suddenly they come out. It's the comfortable concentration camp of the housewife who needs to revolt against the man, against the family. Then you've got abortion. Let's, women's liberation. I mean, just think the term liberation, national liberation movements. You got a sexual liberation movement. And then, of course, you've got why homosexuality. I remember I was talking to an Orthodox priest. He was saying, where did this come from? Homosexuals have never been popular, I'm not for persecuting them, but why are they such a big deal now? Why is this so big? Well, because Christianity, traditional Christianity, is anti-communist. So how do you put them in the corner? How do you back them off? You make them into the bad guy. Because the Bible says homosexuality is wrong, so you make them into bigots, and you just that becomes a weapon. So it's all of these different little strategies are part of the communist movement. And I think it was Munzenberg who said we have to make the communist movement about all kinds of people who aren't communists. We have to he was a strategist. We have to bring in all kinds of other causes and associate them with us so that we are then protected, right? Because then you can't go after him. He's not a communist. He's an environmentalist, or he's a feminist, or what have you. But the larger elements of the strategy are really surprising. And I think most of your listeners will be shocked to hear what that is. I think what you're talking about is really very much every day how it works.
Yeah, in Germany, we have this saying, I don't know if you have it also in English. The way to hell is made with good intentions.
Exactly.
So of course, you always have the best intentions, and everything is to save the people, save the old people, save anybody, save the environment, save from, for example, gay people, or save whatever. But this are all these groups are only, in my opinion, like instrumentalized for this political takeover, which is going on, and for communism, as we saw in history, and as we see in some countries still trying in this model. We need a lot of control. We need a lot of power to keep this system on. We need walls. We need fences. We need aggressive military. And so the idea of this long-range strategy or plan is not far away when we are talking about new vaccination passes, which are already established. The European Union will get something like their first own European passport, and this will be the vaccination passport. And so it's not so far away when we talk about that. When we have talked about this 2 years ago, the people would say, "Oh, you are crazy conspiracy theorists." But now maybe we get some more people's attention on this topic. Fabio, you were like completely in the topic in this year, and you were concentrating on this very much. What was the point for you, and what kind of danger do you see? What kind of solutions? Because you are also in a German, maybe you explain it yourself. It's the MLPD, but not the Marxist-Leninist Party. This is like a comedy turnover Marxist Party. Please tell me more about that.
Yeah, it's the Marktradikal-Libertäre Partei Deutschland, so the market liberal or libertarian, because but we had to rename ourselves into die Marktradikalen, so the market radicals, because the actual communist MLPD on Twitter told us we can't be another MLPD. Your question, how I came about, we just mentioned Willy Münzenberg, and I want to add something shortly, but it's actually how I came to the whole subject. You were talking about the front organizations, etc., and I think it's relevant to the topic to remember, for instance, that Lenin was talking about useful idiots, so people who could be used for the communist cause without being actually aware of working for the communist cause. And I never found a source for the useful idiots thing, a literal source. But here in this book, it's the political biography of Willy Münzenberg by Babette Gross, who was his girlfriend. So until his death. So she's very positive about him. And she tells that he was talking about Clubs der Harmlosen, which translates to the clubs of the innocents, of those who can't do anything, any damage or anything, for those fronts where they, like Mr. Nyquist said, they created some liberation front, and I'm talking about the 20s and the 30s, so much earlier than anything Golitsyn wrote. And just wanted to add that, because that's actually how I dug into the subject. I really started as early as I could, but I had to start somewhere. So I started around 1890 with Sergei Nechayev, and then later on, and Mr. Münzenberg, for instance, he was present in Zurich when Lenin onboarded the train to Leningrad in 1917. So he was really inside, and probably died later at the hands of Stalin's in southern France, because he only realized how wrong he was when Stalin and Hitler made their pact. And then he denounced Stalin, But earlier on, he was a brilliant strategist, a true believer, and he was actually probably as influential or maybe much more influential than Joseph Goebbels, who every German knows as father of propaganda, etc. But if you study Manzenberg, they actually copied a lot from the communists. It doesn't look so original anymore, the whole Nazi thing.
Yeah, the Nazis did copy from the Soviets a lot of things. In fact, Hitler had ambitions as World War II went on. He continually adopted measures that were strikingly similar to those that Stalin was using. So it's almost like when Stalin made the not one step back order in late 1942 during the German advance towards Stalingrad. Hitler had his no retreat orders with similar kind of threats against the officers that retreated that Stalin had used. This is one example of many. And then the way that Hitler was willing to sacrifice his troops, the way Stalin was, so that the losses became just think about this: Germany in World War II, half of all the casualties, the deaths that Germany suffered in the war, were suffered in 1945. So you have half dying right up to then, and then Hitler just desperately trying to stay in power, and just enormous sacrifices, because after the Battle of the Bulge, the Panzer divisions are shattered, the Luftwaffe is shattered. You've got the Volkssturm, you've got the people under arms. They're just handing rifles to 15-year-olds and 65-year-olds, to go out and fight. And these people aren't troops. They're not able to defend the country, but they die in large numbers against these big armies. You got the US Army, the British Army, the Soviet Army coming in on Germany from three sides. Germany should have surrendered. Why didn't Germany surrender? You see? And it was a terrible, terrible thing that both the Allies had unconditional surrender at the same time, and that Hitler was determined to sacrifice the Germans for every extra day he could stay in power. This is a very much the way that Mao and Stalin, they would sacrifice their whole country for one day in power, right? One more day. So yeah, it's a Soviet. Yeah.
A friend of yours, as far as I understood, Mrs. Diana West.
Yes.
I read a book about of American Betrayal, it's called, and it's actually very from a U.S. perspective how the U.S. Administration was infiltrated during World War II, etc., and the whole history. But for us Germans, I mean, I live in Switzerland right now, but I identify as German. It's quite interesting to read that, according to her, the World War II could have ended in 42. That's the year my mother was born, in December. And she said that the war did not end because there was a significant German resistance, apparently, which we hardly ever hear about. That was, and there were the good guys, and there were anti-Nazi and anti-communists, and that was their problem, because somehow the US, or the Western allies, I don't know who was involved and who was infiltrated and not, etc. But they did not want to help the German resistance, because they were fine with them being anti-Nazi, but not anti-Soviet too. So apparently they wanted to somehow support the Soviet Union.
Yeah. No, there's a whole history of World War II. Not only did Diana expose some of this hidden history of World War II, which is unknown about the American side, and there's a huge hidden history on the German side that is just not talked about. You're not allowed to talk about it. But there's mysteries. There's things we don't understand still about the war, because you could say, in effect, historians are afraid to talk about them. And so just to talk about Diana's book a little bit, the most controversial thing in Diana's book was the claim that co-president Harry Hopkins, who lived in the White House with FDR, was Soviet Agent 19. And there's a tremendous amount of evidence for this. Hopkins did so many things to help the Soviets. There's evidence, maybe famously, you know about Senator Joseph McCarthy, wrote a book called Retreat from Victory, in which he basically asked the question in so many words, was General Marshall a communist agent of some kind? General George Marshall, the head of the Army, the chief of staff of the U.S. Army. And we know that the White House was full of Soviet agents. You have basically the man who was running the Treasury Department, Harry Dexter White. We know it's a fact he's a Soviet agent. They basically caught him. They basically had the evidence. Alger Hiss at the State Department, who basically was at Yalta rolling FDR around in his wheelchair at Yalta, doing a lot of the. In fact, Alger Hiss was the acting general secretary of the UN at its opening session in San Francisco in 1945. So you have, and these are, and there's just so many of them. The FBI or the U.S. Military, they got part of a code book out of Finland from the battlefield. Finland started the war on Germany's side. Of course, they were attacked in the Winter War by Stalin in November 30th, 1939. But the continuation war, where Finland was allied with Germany, they ended up switching over to the Allied side at the end of the war, and they gave the Americans parts of this code book of Soviet captured code, and they were able to break the Soviet code. And then they found out the U.S. we were full of spies. They were able to identify. They believed in 1943 there were now the White House at that time had hundreds and hundreds of staff, but there were over 320 Soviet agents working in the White House in 1943. Give you an idea of the infiltration. And Diana West point is they were seriously influencing U.S. policy and strategy, both in the European theater and in the Pacific, and they were influencing the strategy to the advantage of the Soviet military and Moscow. But what you find out when you go to Germany is Germany was also infiltrated. You have Martin Bormann, who there were many experts say Martin Bormann was a Soviet agent. Martin Bormann was Hitler's right hand. You have Heinrich Müller, Gestapo Müller, right? The head of the Gestapo, Soviet agent. You have, in fact, Walter Schellenberg, the head of SD Foreign Intelligence, was basically saying in his memoirs how Müller tried to recruit him in April 1943 after a police conference. You've got the fact that nobody ever found his body, Müller's body. And you have, in fact, when they dug up, they had a funeral for him I think it was in 1945, they dug up the grave and it was someone else's body in his grave. And the same thing with Martin Bormann. They dig up a parking lot and they find his bones. Well, did he die of natural causes, and were those bones put there? Were those really his bones? There's a lot of issues around this. And the Nazi diaspora and the way that the war ended. I'll just give you one idea. Think about this for a minute. Germany's in a two-front war. Soviet armies are very coming, towards Berlin. They're much closer. Berlin is more to the eastern side of the country. You have the Western Allies stuck against the Rhine, right? When Market Garden failed, they got stuck. What does Hitler do? Hitler takes all the panzer divisions. He could put together 2 panzer armies and the 17th Army, and he attacks with these 3 armies the Americans, all on the Americans. And he takes so many troops off the Eastern Front that in Guderian's memoirs, Guderian says we're outnumbered on the Eastern Front 7-1 by the Soviets. And the Soviets, after the collapse of Army Group Center in August 1944, the Soviet armies move a little bit forward, and then they stop in front of Warsaw, and they allow the Nazis to wipe out the Polish Home Army. But all Stalin does is he goes into the Balkans, and he takes Romania, he takes Bulgaria, he enters Yugoslavia. Meanwhile, everything's put on the Allies. And Eisenhower is saying during the Battle of the Bulge, where are the Soviet troops? They're just sitting there, and they don't move. The Soviets don't move until 13 January, when the Battle of the Bulge is basically over. Then the Soviets started moving, when the Americans were just exhausted. The worst battle in American history in terms of death and casualties, the Battle of the Bulge. You call it the Ardennes offensive, the Battle of the Ardennes. We call it the Battle of the Bulge. But that was the most damage the American military ever took in a battle. And I believe that we don't really understand what Hitler did. I believe that Hitler had made a deal with Stalin, that he would take these divisions and move them west if Stalin would leave him alone for so many months. Soviet army didn't move open path to Berlin. They didn't move September, October, November, December. Then halfway through January, they move. Come on. They were almost continuously attacking through 1944. Oh.
I also want to mention that I think this is not only an ancient phenomenon, because now this is long time ago, and everybody is thinking about this historical stories, and which are right and which are wrong, but we see it in the present now in Europe, and we see it in Germany, especially, and other places in the world. We have, for example, the European Union, which is acting like the Soviet Republic, when you say it in my words. We have this not elected commission, which is like the Soviets those days. And they are making laws for 27 countries in Europe, for the European Union. The parliament is elected, but they are not really in charge to make the laws. They only can accept or deny the laws, and the commission makes the laws until they are voted yes. And in Germany, we saw now we have already this Green Party now in our in charge with together with some other parties, and we had Angela Merkel as chancellor for 16 years, with a GDR passed, and some strange stories about that, because her father was a Christian, pater, and he moved from Western Germany to the GDR because he was so, he felt so nice to live in the GDR. So one of the only people who moved to the socialism country. And now, yesterday, or 2 days ago, Angela Merkel had her last day in charge after 16 years. And now she has an office in Berlin. And this is the old office from Margot Honecker, the wife of Erich Honecker, and the head of state of the GDR for several years. So isn't it funny what kind of coincidence we see here?
Yeah. No, Merkel's background is extremely strange, and what her father did is extremely strange. And the point, I think, is that the Russians and the communists, the Soviets and the communist parties that exist, the communist movement, is very good at infiltrating, to getting into positions in governments around the world. And they're able to get into those governments. They're able to get into positions of influence. In World War II, we've got it documented in Washington, around the president, in Berlin around the chancellor, in Japan, in Great Britain. You've got Kim Philby, who was the fair-haired boy of MI6, he was being groomed to lead MI6. And we know he was a Soviet agent. He died in the Soviet Union. He had to flee to the Soviet Union when they found him out. So they always get in. So if the infiltration was bad in the 1930s and 40s, when we had better security and more conscientious people than we have now, how bad is it now when we no longer believe that communism is a threat? And this is the two elements of the strategy, and it's just two sentences that the Soviets devised is fake the collapse of communism and make it go underground to be more effective. Collapse the Soviet Union, collapse the Eastern Bloc. What do you need, Poland and East Germany and Hungary? What are they worth? If you can get into Washington, if you can get into London, if you can get into Paris, if you can get into Tokyo, what is that worth? And then, second part of the strategy, a false split between Russia and China to make everybody believe that Russia and China are enemies and they're no longer a threat to the West because they're mainly threatening each other. Those are the two main strategic elements of what we call the long-range strategy. And I believe those elements, you can document them. There are people who have gone through and documented it. There's so much to support this. It's unbelievable. And we all missed it. We're all indoctrinated. Oh, Russia and China are enemies. One of the predictions that Golitsyn makes in his 1984 book, aside from that the Berlin Wall will go down and the Soviet Union will give up communism, is Golitsyn said that at the end of the long-range strategy, Russia and China will be one clenched fist. They will be allied and they will come at the West, and there will be a change in the balance of power, and the West will be too weak to stand up to them. And look at what we see now with the mobilizations in Russia and China, and how American generals, I know from now, American generals are in a panic. Our Navy is smaller than the Chinese Navy. Our Navy has not been this small since before World War I. And the Chinese Navy, they've got like more than 60 more warships than we do. And the Russian Navy has very fine equipment and is also very large now. How did this happen? And their Army mobilizations, their Air Force mobilizations. I talked to a military expert a couple months ago, and he said the air surges in China, where they're sending planes at Taiwan and then they turn back, they are surging more aircraft than we thought they had. Then either they have some miracle of mechanics where they can turn the aircraft around faster, or they got more aircraft than we ever thought. And the same thing out of Russia with these Russian maneuvers in the Black Sea and along the demonstrations along the Ukrainian border. What's going on? So Golitsyn's final prediction about one clenched fist, it's unfolding before our eyes right now.
Can I just ask something maybe a little bit far off, but we are talking about a long-range strategy, about decades at least, maybe even centuries. Do you have any opinion on the alleged prediction of we need 3 world wars and this American Mr. Pike apparently or
that's
allegedly?
False. That letter is a fabrication.
The Mazzini thing.
The Mazzini, right, exactly. The Pike Mazzini correspondence. It's a forgery.
Yeah,
it's a forgery.
Sounds
just
weird.
Like the Protocols of the Elders of Zion was a forgery. That's a forgery. Yeah. It's been proved a forgery, but these conspiracy theorists, it's really great to make predictions about the future when you're already in the future.
Yeah.
Right? I'm going to make all kinds of predictions about World War II, and then I'm going to discover that I made them in 1920 or something.
Yeah.
And that's just a famous technique. I mean, that technique was used by the Romans, back more than 2,000 years ago.
Okay.
So you make a prediction, and then after it comes straight. It's like the joke: never make predictions, especially about the future. So.
Yeah, I'm not even sure I want to mention it, but I mean, we know a few examples of bold predictions, like some people in Russia predicting American presidents way in advance, etc. There are strange things happening somehow, and a long range planning. I mean, it's difficult to grasp for me
Right.
who's
Well,
actually acting consciously and who's just a useful idiot, etc.
right. Well, people talk about, I hear these American China experts or so-called talking about 100-year Chinese strategy. It's always much more complicated than that. I mean, first of all, we're Europeans, the Americans are really just sort of German transplants because the British are really Germanic, and mostly America was founded by Germans and English and Scandinavians. In fact, German was almost an official language here at one time. They debated it because there were so many Germans here. But long range strategy, it's a complicated subject because communism, it's better to conceive of communism as a movement. Okay. And that movement, Munzenberg's a strategist. Lenin was always talking about, Lenin saw ahead, and see good strategists, they see ahead. And it isn't, communist thinking is sort of a hybrid. It's partly the hoo-ha of the Marxist, dialectical materialism, but they actually have studied some economics and sociology, so they do have insights. Lenin had insights, Marx had insights. And Lenin's insight was, they called World War I the first imperialist war. And Lenin said there's going to be a second imperialist war. When he realized that communism wasn't going to sweep over all the countries in the world, he said, we came to power in Russia because of the first imperialist war. So communism will spread because if we get a second imperialist war. So he was looking forward to that, and he developed his strategy. And Stalin was really the guy to carry it out, based on the idea that, and this is why Stalin called Hitler the icebreaker of the revolution. They wanted a guy to come to power. They looked at Hitler and they said, look, if he comes to power, we can use him to break things up. We can use him to cause a war in Europe. And they also looked at Japan and the Pacific the same way. When you look at the strategy, and there's a wonderful book. It was called Stalin's War. And it was written by a German officer who had been in Ernst Toppisch, Stalin's War. Do you know this little book at all?
No.
I
He
heard
was
about it.
he was an officer in 6th Army. I guess he got wounded and he got shipped out, so he didn't get trapped with the army. But he had thought about, being a soldier on the Eastern Front. He'd thought about it for many years. And he, in the early 1980s, he wrote this book in which he analyzed World War II. And he said, Stalin tricked Hitler. Hitler wasn't so smart. Hitler was clever, but he got outwitted by Stalin. And he goes and he talks about what was known about this long range strategy they had then, which of course changed. And the whole strategy was to use and Lenin talked about it, that there was friction between Japan and the US over the Pacific. And to try to provoke long-term a conflict between Japan and the US, and to provoke a conflict between Germany and the Western Allies. 1926, there was the secret agreement that Tukhachevsky signed with General von Seeckt to secret training, where the German army secretly trained in the Soviet Union. This secret agreement in 1926. They wanted to, so why would the Soviet Union help Germany get back on its feet again? Because this was their long range. They wanted Germany to strengthen because they needed a war. And so, and you notice what happened with the Hitler-Stalin pact. Stalin thought he had a partner to go into Poland with. But Hitler goes into Poland and Stalin waits, and the Allies declare war on Hitler, but then not on Stalin, because once they see that they've declared war on Hitler and Stalin comes in, they go, oh no, we can't declare war on both Hitler and Stalin. That would be bad, right? This is common sense. You're not going to sink your own ship. It's like, okay. So Stalin gets away with it, with taking his part of Poland. But Hitler ends up in a war and Stalin's just laughing. Now Germany's at war with England and France, and then Stalin's free to invade Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Finland, to invade Romania and take away Bukovina and Bessarabia, to invade Persia, right? So Stalin invades all these countries. He basically attacks most of his neighbors, all of his neighbors in the West, in the western part of the Soviet Union. He attacks them all. And meanwhile, there's Hitler stuck in a war with Britain and France, and then America eventually. This is great strategy. And this is what Ernst Toppisch in Stalin's War points out. This is great strategy. And the same thing in the Pacific. When you read the history of the Pacific War, the Japanese generals are saying, we need to fight the communists. And then these admirals are saying, well, we need the oil in Indonesia. The Americans are against us. Well, who is pushing against Japan is Harry Hopkins and Harry Dexter White in the Treasury. There's a book called, I can't think of the name of it. It's called something Snow. And it's about how Harry Dexter White, the communist agent in the Treasury Department, framed these messages to Japan as ultimatums that humiliated the Japanese and forced them to attack at Pearl Harbor. And that was Operation Snow. That's the name of the book. The book's called Operation Snow, and it's about how, and actually a Soviet spy chief in his memoirs admitted it was an operation, that to get America to provoke Japan was an operation of Soviet agents in Washington to cause the Pearl Harbor event. Because if the Japanese did not attack Pearl Harbor, they might have joined with made peace with China and sent their armies into Siberia to help Hitler against Stalin, you see? So they had to make sure. And again, it was agents in Washington, agents in Tokyo. So why is this important? Because right now there's agents in Berlin, in Paris, in Washington now, and you talk about the vaccine agenda, the biological attack by the virus from China. What's going on? I believe it's a biological war, but it's like a scissors strategy. They send the weapon to us, and they have our own leaders infiltrated, so they adopt the wrong policies, lockdowns, vaccines, to demoralize us, to divide us from within, and to destroy our economy, right? So this is like, and I would call it's right out of what the Russians call the overture. That's the period, before an opera, you have the overture. The overture is a period before World War III when you weaken, you soften the enemy up before you attack him with your main armies. Mm. And this is what it looks like right now. You talk about the long-range strategy. Their deception regarding China worked. Their deception regarding the collapse of communism worked. And nobody in Europe or America, no major politician is saying, wait a minute, Russia and China are together. Communism is trying to take over from within. We've been tricked. We got to wake up. They're still clueless.
Yeah, I think also it's very, very obvious what's happening over there. We have now a new quality of war. We don't need weapons in the old-fashioned thinking. We don't need bombs, and we don't really need soldiers, although they now have, I think, 12 to 17,000 soldiers in the country in use in Germany to control the people and to control their quarantine time, for example. But when you talk to many people about this communism plan, then the people say, oh no, communism is not our problem, because they say capitalism is the problem because we have this big tech companies, we have Amazon, we have Facebook or whatever, and also globally engaging companies where you don't know if this company is still a private company or maybe belongs to the government, because they are so close. Also with the vaccine production company BioNTech, which I call always BioNCash, which now has the best contracts you ever can make. You have hidden contracts. You have you're not in charge for anything. They have to buy everything for several years. It's already ordered. They're making the prices and so on and so on. And the government of Germany is still giving money to the production, to the factories they're building up. They make billions of euros, and their shares going up in the sky. But we are still spending taxes in building up their factories. So what my point is, this illusion of the thing Marx called capitalism, and the actual situation what we have now, which many people call corporatism. Can you explain that? Because I also think this is a very big and misunderstood point.
Yeah, there's a very easy way to explain this. Mao Zedong was a great strategist, and he used to lecture on this all the time in the 1950s in China. Marxists would come from all over the world to listen to Mao lecture. So Mao would give the following lecture, and he called it the Yinan Way. He said, this is how the communists took over China. We made the landlords rich. We helped the capitalists in China get rich. We helped the opium growers get rich. Why sew up their pockets? Because he said, look, all of these bourgeois people, they think power is money. And Mao said, power comes from the barrel of a gun, and they don't know it. Power comes from political position, and they don't know it. So make them understand that we will help them get rich. And he says, of course, we're going to shoot them when we get total power. But as long as we make them our partner and we help them get rich, they will help us get into position. And so we work with them and we help them get rich. So they have money, and then we have the guns. And then it's stick them up. We have the money and the guns. And he gave this lecture over and over again. There was a Peruvian Marxist. Now Peru is taken over by communists now. Peruvian Marxist wrote a book about this, about what he wrote out some of Mao's lectures. And they're absolutely brilliant. Mao says, why sew up the capitalist pockets? They're only interested in money, not power. We're interested in real power. So let them have their money, and we'll have the guns and the power, and we'll win the elections, and we'll get on the city councils, and then we'll get into the Senate, and we'll get into the government, and then we'll make the laws, and then one day we'll wake up and they'll be herded into cattle cars, and bang, bang, they're all dead. And that's what we're seeing is that, what did China and Russia do? They went to go into business so Russia's, look, it's gas. Europe needs to stay warm. And China, we have cheap labor in China, so we make everything cheaper for you. We'll make your vitamins. We'll make your pharmaceuticals. We'll make your vaccine precursors, right? And, you'll have to take a jab with our vaccine precursor. But what's in the vaccine precursor? It's not in the ingredient label. So then it becomes, they come into the position then to make their partners in the West rich. All the big pharma companies that lined up with the Chinese, and all of the companies that lined up with Russia in Germany. And they think, this is a wonderful partnership. Russia supplies the raw materials and the energy, and we supply the know-how. But the real know-how is, you're getting rich, but we're getting into position to kill you. And we're using this whole thing to kill you. And that's what Mao called the Yinan Way. And at first, when Stalin first heard this, he mocked it. But before his death, Stalin said, no, Mao is right. We need to do this. And that's when Khrushchev came in and said, we're going to do an opium war against the West. We're going to use organized crime, drugs. We're going to get into the money laundering in the banks in Europe, in North America. They studied it in the 1950s. So they have so many strategies. And we don't understand. People say a capitalist is this evil conspirator. Excuse me, but all that money so I can have cheap gasoline, or my house can be warm through the winter. Everything you sit on and use is made by a corporation. What's evil about that? They make money, but our standard of living is very high. So then we demonize these people. Well, they should be demonized, but not for making all these nice things. They should be demonized for becoming partners with murderers and criminals in Moscow and Beijing, because that's what's going to kill us all. It's just like all the people in Germany that thought, oh, Hitler's a good guy, he'll stop the communists. But then Hitler allies with Stalin and starts a war, and Germany is destroyed. Who wins? The Soviet troops come in, and Europe, there they are in the middle of Europe. And then you get the GDR, and you get all the rest of the terrible things that happened for 4 decades.
Yeah, and also never forget that the NSDAP, the party of Hitler, was the National Socialist Worker Party.
Yeah.
And also, the
I-
guy who founded this party and was called DAP before, he was a socialist, and he said, the socialists are not strong enough, and that's why they made this new direction of socialism, which is only a soft version of the communism idea. Yeah, Fabio, you
Yeah,
wanted to tell us
yeah.
something?
To quote Willy Münzenberg again, it's online. Everybody can research that. There are all old propaganda texts by Willy Münzenberg where he explicitly talks about the socialists competitor basically in the Nationalsozialistische Arbeiterpartei. So it was like a sectarian fight. It was not. They were not completely. It's like other lefties keep fighting among each other, and it was a clear, according to Münzenberg, of course, it was not real socialism, but only their brand of socialism was real socialism. But they were not like, as we learn today in Germany, somehow right wing in the sense that were like Catholics or monarchists or believers in the Kaiser or whatever, but. Yes, back in the days, if we think we are in 36 or something, they were also kind of modern, like modernist, progressive. They reformed everything, and I mean the whole world was in Berlin to celebrate how great everything is at the Olympics. So yeah, that's much more to say about all of that.
Yeah. And of course, in the game, I mean, you think about it, as bad as it was in World War II with the communists infiltrating everywhere, you had somebody like J. Edgar Hoover at the FBI, who was actually finding out things. They actually learned about what the communists were doing. You had Admiral Wilhelm Canaris in Germany, a guy who realized, woke up early and thought, okay, Hitler's evil. These people in the SS and the SD are bad guys. Even Reinhard Heydrich was his protege. Former naval officer, became the head of the Reich Security Office. And he realized that he was evil. And he said, I'm not going to do what General Beck did. I'm not going to resign. I'm staying right here, because if I go, then Heydrich takes over all of intelligence. And so he fought Hitler from the inside, and he fought the communists at the same time. He was trying to prevent Germany from destroying Europe, from Hitler from destroying Germany. He was trying to save Germany the whole time from within. And of course, this guy, Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, was a German hero who tried to warn the British in 1938. He had, it is believed now, recent scholarship suggests he had a secret meeting with the head of MI6 when he went to one of his trips to Spain, and tried to arrange peace. You know, he talked about them trying to get peace in 1942. Canaris was behind these efforts to peace, and another one of his proteges, you could say that Walter Schellenberg, continued that work. Schellenberg actually offered Canaris a chance to escape when he went to arrest him. and basically Schellenberg tried to do that, and these guys tried to save Jews. But Canaris got hanged in April of 1945. They found his diary. Hitler saw his diary and said, he's been working against me the whole time. And so they hanged him. But a brilliant Admiral Canaris, read his history. In World War I, very famously, he was the intelligence officer on the light cruiser Dresden that evaded the British Navy for like 3-4 months and ended up in a Chilean fjord, trapped. And he tricked them so that they blew up the ship so the British couldn't capture it. Very famous. And then they were interned in Chile, and he went across the Andes on foot to get to Buenos Aires, and then impersonated a British passenger on a ship to get to England, and then made his way back to Germany through Holland during the war. So this guy's an incredible hero. And he did incredible. And you know what's amazing to me is that he had chivalry. He had the old-fashioned chivalry and honor that the German officer was traditional for a German officer. And he lived it. He did it. And that's possible. And that's unless we can recover that, we can't win against these people, against these communists. And so you need intellectual clarity, but you need morality. You need honor.
This is my next big point, because I think this is very, very important speech and an interview also. But what do you think, Fabio and Jeff, what is the solution? What could be a solution? What could be a way out of this terrible plan? Is it so perfect that we just can watch it and have to act in it, or what is the power? What is the power we still have to stop that, and not only watching it and talking about it in 30 years again, and see this is also part of the plan?
Did you want to go first, Fabio?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, I take much of my future forecasting from you, Mr. Nyquist. So, and as far as I understand you, the outlook is actually pretty bleak. So, well, maybe you have some. I mean, my solution is trying to. Maybe I'm naive, but I still somehow believe in the good of people and seeking truth, etc. And I try to convince people. It's very hard because people don't like the idea of having been fooled. I know that myself because I'm a former lefty myself. I consider myself a formerly brainwashed, etc. So I didn't like it very much, but I prefer truth, and I try to tell about it, to show people the actual literature and the facts, and show them that it's actually very well documented. It's not some crazy internet stuff, but you have to try to get in the mind. I think I somehow understand the mindset of these guys. And if you see the world through the lens of a Chinese CCP general, many things that we in the West, we say, oh, it's a clown world, or oh, it doesn't make sense, or we're all crazy. But if you put on this Chinese general Marxist-Leninist long-range strategy perspective, it actually kind of makes sense. Suddenly, everything, it doesn't look so crazy anymore, but it all happens for a reason. But I don't know what the solution is. I mean, we're trying to work on a solution by connecting with an expert from the US and by talking about it in Europe, etc. That's my idea about it.
Yeah. Well, evil is its own special kind of stupid. And I will point to one date that illustrates it. You read Ernst Topisch's book, you read Viktor Suvorov's book, Icebreaker and The Chief Culprit, about World War II, about what the communists did in World War II strategically. And you have this one date. It's June 22nd, 1941. And that is the date, of course, that Hitler attacked the Soviet Union, but it's the date of the biggest military disaster in communist history. The Soviet armies were annihilated at the border by the Wehrmacht. The communism was almost destroyed. If it hadn't been for the severe winter weather in December 1941, Stalin was ready to flee. They had evacuated the government apparatus from Moscow. But of course, on December 5th, 1941, the temperatures dropped to 40 below zero, and the German equipment was frozen. The men were frozen. They couldn't advance. And they were already exhausted, and that was it. But this date, June 22nd, shows that the very best plans of these of the communists always have this moment of failure. In 1989 to 91, I had extensive conversations with defectors and a disgruntled former KGB officer about what really happened in Germany in 1989 and what happened in the Soviet Union in 91. And it was all planned. They were planning that the reunification of Germany would take several years. And that way it would all happen on their terms. But it all went awry. It went awry when Germany was reunited in the course of about a year rather than several years. And this caused the Soviet armies in East Germany, now Germany, a NATO country, to fall apart and to begin a larger unraveling that very much damaged the Soviet Union in ways that they had prepared in case, but they had not expected that. So their plan, they were hoping to be where they are now in the year 2000. Now it's 2021, and they're just catching up. So that knocked them off their plan 21 years, their long-range plan. These plans do not work correctly, exactly. And people can become awakened. They can become aware of what's happening. And people have a natural resistance. So I say evil is its own stupidity, and we have on our side truth. We have on our side truth. Eventually, the problem with the lie is eventually it has an expiration date. People will only believe it so long, and then the truth comes out. And you can't stop the truth when it comes out. They had to, the Soviet leader Gorbachev had to denounce Stalin, had to admit the Katyn Forest massacre, that they had blamed on the Germans at Nuremberg. The Soviets committed the atrocity against the Polish officers, and they blamed the Germans at Nuremberg, and they had done it. Sitting in judgment on the Germans, they had been murderers too. So you see, there is eventually the truth comes out. And the problem is, because this has become such an extensive process for both China and Russia, the Chinese population was becoming restive before this pandemic. They were having, it wasn't just Hong Kong. All over China, you talk to people that were in China, they were having riots. Their people, the biggest danger they have is their own people. You look at Russia, you look at the problem with in Russia with Navalny. You look at the problems with the riots that they saw last year in Russia. You look at the Russians are tired. They're exhausted of the lies of their government. Putin's popularity has fallen. See? So how long, much longer can they hold it together? And if they have one major misstep, if they get exposed, if the truth comes out, those regimes could collapse for real. Just like there was a partial real collapse in 1989 to 1991 when their plans did not work out exactly right. They're very flexible. They're very adaptive. But once the people you guys in the German-speaking world, look at Austria and the vaccine mandates, look at Germany and the new SPD government. You guys are being pushed to the wall. This is a moment where the German-speaking world, you're ahead of everyone else. You are going to go through what we're going to go through. You're just months ahead of us now. And so the consciousness in the German-speaking world is so important right now. This is where it's happening. You are the battlefield now. And if you can get the truth through, and the truth is inevitable, it will win. It's just a matter of time, and it's only a matter of how much damage, how much tragedy takes place. How much tragedy before how much truth? It is pain that makes us wake up to the truth. You have that pain, you have that loss, you have that tragedy. Wait a minute. Hitler was not a patriot. He was selfish. He wanted power. He had a crazy dream. And he was a narcissist, right? He was a malignant narcissist. And you say, that was bad. So you wake up and you look at Putin with his nasty smile and his devious pretense of being a patriot or a Christian or a conservative. It's all a trick. Wake up. Everybody's going to wake up, and it's when right now is the crisis. They're pushing Austria with everything they have. What, they make the interior minister the chancellor? They make a policeman with a high school education into the chancellor of Austria? What? And then what's going to happen in Germany's next? So you have to see this. You have to wake up, because there's not much time now.
Thank you very much, Jeff. This is also, it's a saying from my heart, was I always saying, and what's also on my channel was always a topic. But I sadly see many people do not see what is the most important thing, and this is freedom, until they lose freedom. And I think this is what people now every day more and more come to see, that our generations before, hundreds of generations or thousands of generations, were always fighting for our freedom. And we took it like natural given, and thought or had too much belief in the governments all over the world. Now we see that we have been and are cheated right now, and it's going on. And for me, the most important thing is also that they don't fall in the trap of the new masquerade of communism as a solution, which many people and new founded parties also present. So they have to understand which is really the root of this problem. So we don't fall in this idea, this old saying, death to the king, long life to the king. What I mean? Not just change the king. We need to have a change in the mindset of freedom. I don't tell it system change, because this is what the other side is always saying, and they mean more communism with that. I mean, we need a system, we need the mindset change to the wealth, the worth of freedom for every people, and to get them more of the American spirits. I think freedom is very big in your country, and we in Europe, especially in Germany, can learn a lot from you and this old spirit, the American spirit. And I think really also Europe and Germany is actually now the battlefield again of this, I call it, Third World War. And I hope we'll see that as a society before the blood is on the streets, much more than now. So some last words from everybody and thank you a lot for the show. Fabio, you want to say something in the end?
Yes. My final words are positive. One quote came to my mind by Professor Anthony Sutton, and I quote his Wikipedia entry. In his view, the only solution to prevent such abuse in the future was that, and here starts the quote, a majority of individuals declares or acts as if it wants nothing from government, declares it will look after its own welfare and interest, or specifically if a majority finds the moral courage and the internal fortitude to reject the something for nothing con game and replace it by voluntary associations, voluntary communes, or local rule and decentralized societies.
Thank you. And Jeff,
Well,
you said already very, very good words to the end, but you have your last words now.
The truth, we have to know, you have to look at the truth. You have to ask yourself, what is really true? How do I know it? What is the evidence? Who has the evidence? And it's the defector literature. It's strategy. Look, we live in a world of nation states, and that has not changed. The great powers in this world are countries with armies, navies, intelligence services, 1 million KGB case officers, right? How many more millions of Chinese state security officers? Cuba, Venezuela, right? Nepal. Look at all the countries that have fallen to communism since the fall of the Soviet Union, so-called. Congo, South Africa. The ANC government is a communist government. Zimbabwe, right? Namibia. Angolan civil war was won by the communists. You know, the MPLA won that civil war. Jonas Savimbi was killed by a sniper, right? And then, and of course, Chavez in Venezuela. You've got Peru just is elected a Marxist president. Brazil is just struggling for its existence. You think communism is dead? You think this is just an accident that communists, you know, Nepal, Maoists took over Nepal more than several years ago. How is communism marching to victory in country after country? And then you look at the president of the United States, Barack Obama, and his vice president, Biden. They have communist contacts going back decades. Obama was mentored by Frank Marshall Davis, a Communist Party USA member. You have Biden was put into the United States Senate by the money of Armand Hammer. Read the Hammer file. Hammer was a KGB agent, both when he was in Germany, when he was in Paris, and when he came to the United States. And the same thing can be said about the Clintons. The Clintons had extensive connections to communist and terrorist groups. The Democratic Party, I was at a communist meeting in 1983, and this communist speaker said, we are taking over the Democratic Party through its left wing. We are going to elect a stealth communist U.S. president. The fall of the Soviet Union enabled that. It enabled a ostensible East German communist youth leader to become the head of the Christian Democratic Union in Germany. It enabled communists to come to power as social democrats. Yeah, Lula da Silva in Brazil and Chavez in Venezuela. Venezuela is the biggest oil-producing country in Latin America. And you had Laurent Kabila come to power in the Congo. You know, country after country, takeover after takeover, and communism doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. And yet, the Chinese Navy is the biggest Navy in the world. The Russians have the most advanced and modern nuclear, the United States nuclear arsenal. I hate to say this to Europe, but our nuclear arsenal is past its shelf life. Our nuclear weapons are rotting. We have not built a new nuclear weapon in this country since 1991. We stopped producing nuclear weapons. These nuclear weapons, they get old. The tritium gas becomes ineffective. We brag that, we have this dial, we can dial down we can dial down the megatonnage. Yeah, we have to. Because they don't have the strength they used to have. When does the nuclear arsenal go away? The head of the Strategic Command has said, in a couple of years, our nuclear arsenal will be ineffective. So look at the timing. Strategy, global politics. It's real. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's history.
Thank you very much for your last words, Jeff. I just can't sign that. What you'd say. And I think, and I hope the people see the importance of this, and that's why we made this interview. Please, everybody, check out what we were talking about. Check out the books. I will link them under the video. And thank you very much to my guests, Fabio Bossi and Jeff Nyquist. Wish you a very nice evening or morning or whatever your time is right now. And thank you really so much. I really appreciate that you came here to my show. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Und an alle meine deutschen Zuschauer, ich hoffe, ihr konntet der Sendung gut folgen. Ich denke, dass es ein extrem wichtiges Thema ist. Auch immer, wenn ich es anspreche, weiß ich, dass es da Widersprüche gibt. Manche werden richtig aggressiv, aber ich denke, dass das ähnlich ist wie das, was Fabio eben auch schon besprochen hat. Man fühlt sich verarscht, ja. Es ist an der Zeit, dass wir da unsere alten Weltbilder und Ideen hinterfragen, denn sonst wird das nichts, ja, sonst wird man hier noch mehr gespalten. Man muss sich auf das besinnen, was wirklich absolut wichtig ist, und das ist die Freiheit, auf die jeder Mensch ein Recht hat. Deshalb mache ich das hier. Vielen Dank für die Aufmerksamkeit. Teilt dieses Video, und die erwähnten Bücher werden wir verlinken. Ansonsten werden wir vielleicht noch andere Sachen verlinken, wo ihr weitere Informationen zu dieser kommunistischen Langzeitstrategie findet, auch auf Deutsch. Vielen lieben Dank, macht was draus, euer Dave.